She said, Zindagi Ko Pasand Nahi, and somehow, those words lodged themselves in my chest, refusing to let go. I remember standing in the corner of the bookstore, the air smelling faintly of old paper and coffee, while she traced her fingers along the spines of the hard covers like she was measuring their weight in her mind. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above made everything feel smaller, more intimate, like the world had shrunk down to just that aisle, just us. She was leaning on the edge of the shelf, tall in a way that made her presence unavoidable, but not in a loud, intrusive way. More like a gravity I hadn't noticed until I collided with it. Her hair was streaked with silver that caught the light, and her eyes, dark, sharp, and so certain, seemed to weigh me without judgment. I could feel my palms itching to do something, anything, to fill the silence, but every word I tried to form lodged somewhere between my tongue and my thoughts. I was stacking returned books when she glanced up, just long enough to make my stomach twist. There was a flicker, half amusement, half patience, as if she noticed my clumsy fumbling but didn't want to embarrass me. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and for a moment, the world outside that aisle felt impossibly distant. "You're new here?" I finally asked, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "Yes," she said, soft, deliberate. 2 weeks. Learning the ropes." And then, after a pause, almost as if she was answering herself, "It's quieter here. Less judgment." Something about the way she said it, like she wasn't just talking about the bookstore, but life itself, sent a shiver down my spine. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or not awkwardly. I did neither. I just watched as she picked up a copy of a travel memoir and held it like it was the last thing in the world worth noticing. The spark didn't hit like a lightning bolt. It was smaller. Subtle. A brush of hands as she passed me a stack of books. Her glance, so quick it could have been accidental, but I felt it anyway. A slight nod when I offered to carry the heavier box. That was all, but it lingered. I could feel it in the back of my neck, in the way my chest tightened when she spoke, in the way I caught myself looking for her in the quiet moments of the day. And then she said it, almost in passing, not like a warning, but like a confession, Zindagi Ko Pasand Nahi. It wasn't meant for me. I'm almost certain she wasn't thinking about me at all. But hearing that raw, unpolished vulnerability wrapped in her usual composure, made something inside me stumble. My brain, which usually calculated every social interaction like a spreadsheet, short-circuited. I wanted to ask what she meant. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice stayed buried behind my ribs. Instead, I just watched her place the book back on the shelf and turn away, her coat brushing against my arm as she walked past. A small act, nothing remarkable, but I felt the echo of it in my chest long after she had disappeared around the corner. I couldn't stop thinking about it. About her. About that pause, that faint hesitation before she left the aisle. About the unspoken weight behind a sentence that, on its own, might have meant nothing. But to me, it meant everything. And for reasons I didn't understand, I knew something in my life had just shifted, quietly, irreversibly. The bookstore smelled like rain that day, the windows streaked with droplets that made the city outside seem blurred and distant. I was stacking a delivery of newly arrived books near the register when she appeared at the end of the aisle, holding a toppled pile of hardcover novels in her arms. "Here," I said before thinking, stepping forward. Let me help." She hesitated, just a fraction of a second, and I noticed the faint tightness in her jaw. She handed me the heavier ones, keeping her fingers curled lightly around the edges of the rest. The way she shifted her weight, balancing the stack as if afraid to drop even a single book, made her seem smaller yet deliberate, like she was measuring the world before she entered it. "Thanks," she said quietly, but the word carried something fragile beneath the calm tone. Almost immediately, she glanced away, scanning the shelves, as though she needed to remind herself that she was in control. I caught the way her hands shook slightly when she placed the remaining books down, the subtle tremor revealing more than she intended. I wanted to comment, to ask if she was tired or if she needed a break, but I didn't. I just stood there, moving slowly, careful not to invade her space, letting the silence stretch. When she finally laughed, a soft, hesitant sound, I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't a loud laugh, it was a private one, reserved for herself, but I caught it anyway. There was something in it that made the world feel simultaneously warmer and heavier, like a faint weight pressing on my ribs I didn't want to shake off. "You always look so organized," I said, trying to break the pause. My voice sounded clumsy even to me, but she didn't reply immediately. Instead, she adjusted a row of books, her movements slow, deliberate, and I realized she was distracted, distant, almost fragile in a way I hadn't seen before. Her eyes flicked toward me for a second, sharp, assessing, then away again, like she wasn't sure if she wanted to be seen at all. "Sometimes," she murmured finally, and then nothing more. Just a pause, lingering between us. I could feel the weight of unspoken words, of thoughts she didn't want to share. I noticed every detail, how the skin of her knuckles was slightly red from carrying the books, how her hair had fallen loose over one shoulder, the faint dark circles under her eyes suggesting a long week, maybe longer. I felt a pull, a quiet urgency that wasn't desire yet but a craving to understand, to offer something, anything, that might ease the guardedness she carried like armor. Then, she reached for a book that had fallen on the floor near my feet. Our hands brushed for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but enough to send a jolt up my arm. Her eyes met mine just as quickly, just long enough for a flicker of something unspoken to pass between us before she pulled back, arranging the book in place and taking a small step away. I stood there a moment longer, heart pounding, watching her turn a corner, feeling the faint ache of a pull I didn't understand yet, but that I knew I couldn't ignore. The space she left felt charged, as if her presence had stretched out and lingered in the air itself. And somehow, just for that fleeting moment, it was enough. The rain came down hard that evening, hammering against the large front windows of the bookstore, turning the street outside into a smear of headlights and reflections. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a sterile glow inside, making everything feel still and suspended, like time had folded in on itself. I was closing up, but she was still there, tucked behind the counter, sorting invoices and receipts. I offered to grab a stack of papers from the back room, but she shook her head, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her fingers lingered there, slightly trembling. I noticed it, of course. "You don't have to do everything yourself," I said gently, though my voice carried more hope than command. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced toward the window, her eyes tracing the streaks of rain. "I know," she said finally, soft, almost to herself. I like to keep things in order. Makes the chaos outside feel manageable." I wanted to reach out, to tell her that chaos was fine, that sometimes letting it in made the world softer, warmer. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, letting the words die inside me where they belonged. When she looked back at me, she smiled faintly, but not the full smile, the kind that reaches your eyes. Just enough for me to feel seen, enough to make my chest ache. I moved a step closer under the pretense of picking up a fallen pen, and for a heartbeat, our hands brushed. Electricity surged, subtle, dangerous, enough to make me swallow hard. "Did you hear from him?" I asked, unable to help myself, though I immediately regretted it. Her hand froze over the papers. She exhaled slowly, not meeting my eyes. "No. He doesn't call anymore," she murmured, almost like she was testing the sound of the words before letting them escape. And then, almost accidentally, she laughed, a small, brittle sound that made my stomach twist. I wanted to say something, anything, that might make her feel lighter. Instead, I simply handed her the pen and backed up slightly, my own restraint burning inside me. She reached for it at the same moment, and our fingers met for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. A sudden chime from her phone startled us both. She picked it up, a tight expression flashing across her face as she read the message. A friend reminding her of a late meeting, a reminder she couldn't ignore. She cursed softly under her breath and began gathering her things, and just like that, the fragile bubble between us was punctured. I watched her move away, every step deliberate, every glance over her shoulder weighted with unspoken thoughts. I wanted to reach for her hand, to stop her from leaving, but the rules, the silence, the delicate thread of propriety, everything held me back. By the time the door clicked shut behind her, the storm outside seemed louder, more insistent. I was left staring at the space where she'd stood, a small ache lodged somewhere between my chest and my throat. The brush of our fingers lingered in my mind, electric, impossible, and yet incomplete. I couldn't stop thinking about it. About how close we'd been, and how impossibly far we still were. About how one small, perfect moment had almost. And then it was gone. We stayed in the bookstore long after closing, though neither of us said so out loud. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, tapping gently against the windows, and the city lights cast pale reflections across the floor. Somehow, the quiet between us had grown heavier, thicker, like it could press the air out of the room if we weren't careful. I was stacking the last of the unsorted books when I felt her presence behind me, closer than usual. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I could sense the weight of her gaze on my shoulders, the way her fingers flexed lightly against the countertop as though she might reach for something, or someone, but didn't. "Do you ever feel like this?" she asked finally, her voice low, almost a whisper. I froze mid-motion. "What do you mean?" I asked, my tone neutral, though my heart hammered against my ribs. She didn't answer right away. She leaned on the counter, letting her weight shift slowly, carefully, as if she were testing the floor beneath her. Like things are moving too fast, or too slow, or maybe we're moving at all, she said, words stumbling over each other, raw and jagged. Her eyes met mine, sharp, unflinching, and then darted away, as though she was scared of what I might see there. I swallowed. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, her arm, her shoulder, anything to anchor myself, but I didn't. I stayed rooted, breathing shallow, watching. "It's not. I mean," she hesitated, pressed her lips together, then finally let out a quiet sigh. "I don't know what we're doing. And I can't stop thinking about it. About you." The air between us seemed to shiver. Her words weren't a confession, not exactly. They weren't romantic, not yet. They were something messier, something bigger than attraction, an acknowledgement that the rhythm between us had shifted, and we could no longer pretend this was just normal, just incidental, just everyday. I wanted to speak. I wanted to say everything I had kept locked away since the first day I noticed her, since the first brush of hands, the first lingering glance. But nothing came out. The silence answered for me. I noticed the small details, the faint dark circles under her eyes, the curve of her hand on the counter, the tiny tremor in her voice. Vulnerability, unfiltered, unguarded. She was holding nothing back, and somehow that terrified me more than anything else. "I can't," she whispered, almost to herself, almost as if she were voicing a confession she didn't even know she meant to say. "I can't stop thinking, and I don't know if that's good or bad. Or possible." The pause stretched, filling the room with its own weight. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her it was okay, that it was human, that none of it mattered as long as we faced it together. But the words remained trapped, inert, unsaid. Instead, I just stood there, listening to the quiet, feeling it press against my chest, feeling the ache of knowing that something had broken open between us, and that neither of us could pretend the pieces were still in place. And then she said it, her voice barely audible, raw in its fragility. Maybe I'm too late to stop it. It was late, and the bookstore smelled of damp paper and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor near the poetry section, a stack of books balanced precariously beside her. I was shelving a row of novels when I noticed a photo tucked into one of the books she had pulled out. "Is that you?" I asked softly, gesturing toward the faded photograph. Her hand froze over the spine of the book. She didn't look at me immediately, just traced the edge of the photo with her thumb. "It's a long time ago," she said finally, her voice quiet, hesitant, carrying a weight I wasn't sure I was ready to understand. I knelt beside her, careful not to crowd her, though every instinct screamed to close the distance. The photo was of a younger version of her, smiling at someone just outside the frame. The light in her eyes then wasn't just joy, it was fragile, like it could shatter with the wrong touch. "I lost someone," she said, the words barely audible, almost swallowed by the bookstore's silence. She tucked the photo back into the book but didn't hide it entirely, like she wanted me to see, but not intrude. I didn't speak. I just watched her. Watched the small tremor in her hands, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her gaze darted away from mine when I dared to meet her eyes. I could feel the gravity of her past pulling at the edges of the room, reshaping it without a word. "You remind me of him," I said finally, almost against my will. My own voice surprised me with its softness. "Not because of how you look or anything, just the way you're here. The way you let yourself carry everything alone." Her lips parted slightly, a breath caught between acknowledgement and disbelief. I wanted to apologize, to backtrack, but the words didn't come. Instead, she exhaled slowly, almost shaking her head, a bitter laugh escaping her throat. "I never thought I'd feel seen again," she admitted. Her hands hovered over the book, fingers brushing the photo as if testing the past against the present. "It's been years. I didn't think anyone would notice the pieces I left behind." I felt my chest tighten, as if someone had pressed a hand into it and refused to let go. Everything about her, the quiet resilience, the fractures she carried, the way she still held herself together, pulled at something raw and protective in me. She looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability she usually kept hidden. Not shame, not fear, just honest, unguarded hurt. And I realized, with a slow, sinking certainty, that the dynamic between us had shifted. Something unspoken had been acknowledged, and nothing would ever feel the same. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, and the city outside felt distant, irrelevant. We sat there, side by side, the quiet between us loaded with shared understanding, with a soft, seismic weight neither of us had named. And then she whispered, almost to herself, almost to the room, "I never thought anyone would stay long enough to notice the cracks." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The weight of it hung between us, enough to change everything. The bookstore was empty that evening, the hum of the city outside softened by the thick glass windows and the faint smell of rain on pavement. We were side by side on the worn rug in the corner, a pile of unsorted books between us. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence carried the weight of weeks, maybe months, of unspoken things. I noticed the way she shifted slightly, as if testing the air between us, then relaxed just enough to let the tension ebb. Her hand brushed against mine while she reached for a book, and neither of us pulled away. Just a touch, fleeting, but it held the gravity of all we hadn't said. "You don't have to explain," I said quietly, my voice low, careful. She looked at me then, her eyes soft but alert, reading me in the way she always did. "I know," she replied. "I just needed to feel like I could." I nodded, though the motion felt almost too big for the quiet space we shared. Her gaze lingered on mine a moment longer, and I realized that the walls she had carried years of caution, heartbreak, regret, were no longer quite as tall. We moved through the pile of books together, side by side, sorting titles and stacking carefully, our shoulders brushing occasionally. Each touch was small, ordinary, but it carried the weight of choice, the choice to stay, to notice, to care. "You're hard to read," I murmured, almost as if testing the air. She laughed softly, a sound that no longer carried fragility, just relief. "Maybe. Or maybe I just don't trust anyone to see the real me." "You can trust me," I said, but the words felt unnecessary. She had already decided, in the way she let her fingers linger on mine when she passed a book, in the slow exhale that seemed to release some of the weight she'd carried alone for so long. The storm had stopped outside, leaving the streets glistening under the pale light of lampposts. I leaned back slightly, letting my hand rest near hers. She didn't move it away. We just sat there, in the quiet aftermath of everything that had shifted between us, and for the first time, it felt like nothing had to be forced. Her head tilted slightly, brushing my shoulder as she reached for the next book, and I felt the pulse of inevitability settle between us. No dramatic words, no confessions, just the acknowledgement that something real had grown, imperceptibly, until it was undeniable. I realized then that what we had wasn't about grand gestures or declarations. It was about presence, about shared silences, about noticing the small details of each other, the tremor in her hand, the pause in her laugh, the way her eyes softened when she thought no one was watching. Her hand brushed mine again, lingering a fraction longer this time. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. We stayed like that, side by side, sorting books, the world outside irrelevant. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full. And in that quiet, I understood, we had arrived. Looking back now, it's hard to remember exactly when the tension between us began, when the small gestures, the fleeting glances, started feeling like the weight of something bigger. But I remember the way she moved through the bookstore, quiet and deliberate, and how I learned to notice the small things, the curl of her hair when she was thinking, the tremor in her fingers when she let herself be tired, the half-smile she reserved for moments I wasn't supposed to see. We didn't rush. Nothing exploded in a perfect moment of clarity. Instead, we grew into each other slowly, almost imperceptibly. I learned to hold back when she needed space. She learned to let me in, just a little at a time. And in that delicate rhythm, we discovered something that was real, something earned. She changed in subtle ways, too. I saw the walls she had built around herself soften, one brick at a time. She allowed herself to linger in moments, to acknowledge her own vulnerability without fear, to share pieces of her past without flinching. And in doing that, she taught me to see not just her, but myself, differently. To notice the quiet parts of life that matter, the pauses, the gestures, the unsaid words. Love, I realized, wasn't a declaration shouted across a stormy street or written in a grand gesture. It was in the lingering touch, the shared silence, the patience to wait for the right moment without forcing it. It was in the understanding that being present for someone, consistently, without fanfare, could be just as powerful as any confession. I can't say I'm the same person I was when I first met her. I notice more now, people, feelings, the moments that slip by unnoticed. And I carry with me the quiet lesson she unwittingly gave me, that intimacy doesn't always need words, and that connection isn't about perfection, it's about presence. For her, I hope the same is true. That she knows she can be seen without pretense. That vulnerability doesn't have to be dangerous. That someone can stay with you in the quiet spaces and that, somehow, that alone is enough. We still share that space sometimes, sitting side by side among the books, sorting through stories and letting the world wait outside. There's no rush, no expectation, just the steady rhythm of understanding, unspoken but undeniable. And sometimes, in a glance or the brush of a hand, it all feels enough to fill the quiet. I don't know what the future holds, and maybe that's the point. It's not about promises or endings, it's about being present enough to notice, to feel, and to choose. And in that quiet choice, we found something lasting, imperfect, and entirely ours. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?